Well, hello, travelers. Welcome back to Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident global citizens. My name is Tim, and as part of Reach the World's efforts to support educators and families during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're sharing free live stream discussions with some of our standout travelers from recent years. You can find an updated calendar of live stream events and much more at athome.reachtheworld.org. Today, we're talking with Fulbright Scholar Anna Blue. Anna shared her experiences as a traveler and researcher in Estonia through a recent Reach the World virtual exchange. And I'm really happy to welcome Anna back today to talk some more about her time in Estonia. If you haven't already read Anna's virtual exchange articles from Estonia, I'd highly recommend them. My colleague Mara will post a link to that in the chat bar on the right side of your screen. Definitely check them out, and you can learn much more about Anna's time in Estonia. Also, please use the chat bar to let us know you're here. We'd love to know who you are, where you're joining us from, and that's also the best way to share any questions you might have for Anna as we go today. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And so without further ado, let's go on a journey to Estonia. Welcome, Anna.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, guys. It's great to meet you. As Tim said, I'm Anna, and I spent the year of 2018-2019 in Estonia as a Fulbright Scholar. So I originally traveled to Estonia to study their government e-services, which are the products that they use to connect with their citizens and their people online. You can think of them as like communicating government services over the internet. So they do a really good job, for instance, of delivering health services, of helping to file taxes, of building companies that are based around internet products. And so I really wanted to study that. I came originally from a background in international relations, and I was really curious about countries in the former Soviet Union. Estonia sits right next to Russia. It's on the western side of Russia and south of Finland, and it used to be in the Soviet Union before the Soviet Union dissolved in the 1990s. And so I was really curious about Eastern European culture, exactly how Estonia, which is a very small country, has built a name for itself with its e-services. And I was keen on learning a lot about the people there and their very unique language and culture.
Very cool. I want to take us back to a little ways before we get too much into Estonia and everyday life, your everyday life in Estonia. Where did you start becoming interested in other countries, and maybe when was the first time you thought that maybe you want to live outside the country for a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I'm not sure if we have anyone on the call who's from the East Coast, but I'm very proud of my roots in this city because I think it's a really global city. I think it does a great job of bringing in diplomats from around the country or from around the world, and representing different languages and peoples, especially with the museums and all the government offices there. And I think growing up in that environment, I became very curious about how people engage with people outside of the United States. And I always had wanted to travel. So I think that was kind of how I grew up. And then in college, I was fortunate to go to a university that had a great study abroad program. And so I actually studied abroad in Spain because I grew up speaking Spanish in high school and in middle school. And so studying abroad in Spain, I just fell in love with the culture. They have amazing cheese, great people, just like a love for arts and siestas and nap times. And I think that was just something that was very special to experience, and kind of got me hooked on traveling. I think ultimately, I was curious to spend an entire year abroad, which is what the Fulbright program is, versus a study abroad program, which is typically about 4 or 5 months. Because I thought if I lived abroad for a year, I would be much more challenged to, integrate into the culture, to feel more comfortable, and also to learn a little bit more about what it's like to live abroad independently. during my study abroad program, I was supported by my university. And so there was a great structure in place with lots of counseling and professors that showed me exactly how I could adjust to the local culture. But in Estonia, as a result of the Fulbright program, you really have to figure out things for yourself. And I think as a result, I really pushed myself to step outside of my comfort zone, say hi to people, and learn to navigate barriers like language when we couldn't communicate in English.
All right, you're one of many people who we've spoken to who have started sort of exploring other cultures through learning a language, which I think is such great advice for so many young people who are like, oh, I'm not college age yet, but I think I might want to study abroad. What can I do to get ready for that? And learning a language is such a great place to start. What was your journey like from Washington, D.C. to Estonia? How does one get between those two places?
Yeah, definitely. So Estonia is pretty much halfway across the world from where I started. I went to school in California, and Estonia and California are, I think depending on whether or not it's daylight savings or not, 10 hours apart in terms of time zone. So as you can imagine, it's quite a journey to fly there. So I think starting in California, I had to take 3 plane rides, a boat ride, and then a bus ride to get to where I'd eventually end up living for the year. I lived in Tartu, Estonia, which is Estonia's second biggest city. And in order to get to Tartu, I took a flight from California to Iceland in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And then from Iceland to Finland, which is the country that the Scandinavian country closest to Estonia, and probably the biggest major airport closest to Estonia. And so I flew into Helsinki, and then I took a boat across the Baltic Sea, which separates Finland and Estonia. And then I took a bus from Tallinn, which is Estonia's capital, to Tartu. And so that's how I ended up in Estonia.
I love the fact that there's a boat ride involved in that journey. That's not something I hear very often.
Estonians are very proud of their connection with water. They're definitely like really heavy on their fisherman's history, and I think a lot of the ancient myths and folklore in Estonia are based off of the sea because they have a deep connection with the Baltic Sea. So boats are very important.
Cool. So you arrived in Tartu, Estonia, and was this your first time there?
It was my first time in Estonia. I'd been fortunate to go to Europe before, so I had been to Spain, as I mentioned, and I also spent a summer living in Geneva, Switzerland. But I had never been farther east than Germany, and I had definitely not ever been to a Slavic country, and so it was my first time there, and I didn't speak the language, didn't know very much about the local culture. But I did know that they were very famous for their technology. They were known as like the Silicon Valley of Europe. So very famous for their startups. And that was probably my only bit of background knowledge on Estonia at that point.
So what were some of the early things that you learned that like built a fuller picture in your head of what Estonia is and what Estonian culture is? What were some of the experiences you had?
Definitely. So Estonia is very small. I think I mentioned that at the beginning. There are only about 1 million people, which is less than the city of Los Angeles or the city of New York. So you can imagine that, although the country itself is about the size of a couple US states, it's not very dense in population. People are very spread out. It's a very rural country. But despite the fact they're small, they're very, very proud of their culture. I think one of their strongest points of pride is that they feel very connected to nature. So they're not a very religious country. They're actually the country with the lowest number of people that are affiliated with a religious organization. But they do feel very spiritually connected to nature. And so Their epic heroes are animals. They have a very famous epic hero that was a hedgehog. They also have like a lot of very famous stories about the power of the trees and water. And I think in general, they really enjoy outdoor activities. So every Estonian knows how to bike, to ski, to boat on rivers, to fish. So those are like very common hobbies of Estonians. It's also really important to know that Estonia is very far north. So they have the coldest winters of all time. So I was coming from California and I didn't own a winter coat. And I had to buy one that was really, really thick and went all the way down to my feet. I bought like 4 or 5 different pairs of snow boots because they would get worn out so quickly from all of the snow. I think I learned a lot up front about Estonian food, which is very heavy on meat and potatoes. You can't grow a lot of fresh vegetables in Estonia because they have such long winters. And so they have a lot of more of like a sturdy diet based on products that are easy to get in winter. One of their favorite things are beets, which I think are really gross, but Estonians love them. They pickle everything, so everything comes in pickled form. They're very proud of their dairy goods. I think one of my favorite treats that I learned about in Estonia was called hapupiim, which is like kind of a like sweet cream cheese, or they put it in waffles or cones and eat like a dessert. And I loved that about Estonia. The food was a huge highlight, and they're very famous for their chocolate. So I ate a lot of chocolate and gained a lot of weight, which was awesome.
That sounds delicious. I knew very little about Estonian cuisine, and now that's all I want to eat right now. You made it sound so good.
It's definitely comfort food.
Yeah, yum. So when you arrived, where did you stay?
So I stayed in an apartment in Tartu. So almost all Estonian architecture is wooden, because as I mentioned, they have a lot of forest. The country is like over 70% forest. And so all of their architecture looks very Scandinavian. And my apartment was on the 3rd floor of an apartment building that was about 20 minutes outside of the center of town. And I rented it from a landlady named Jana, and she was really wonderful. She and her family lived below me. My apartment was a 1-bedroom apartment that I had to myself. So it got kind of lonely sometimes in the winter, but it was also nice when I needed to study in the quiet. And then in terms of like living features in general, Estonian apartments, I think, look a lot like American apartments. They have usually a bedroom with a chest and a closet. They'll have a couch, a living room area. The only big difference, I think, is the bathrooms. So Estonian showers and toilets and sinks can be a lot different. Estonians also don't really tend to use dryers. So they'll wash their clothes and then air dry them. So I never used a dryer for a year, which can be common in the US as well sometimes. But other than that, yeah, I loved my apartment. It was very cozy. It had heating, which was really useful for when it got down to like negative 18 or 19 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, that's cold. You had talked a little bit before about how important nature is to Estonia and Estonian people. What were your interactions with nature? Did you come across any animals during your time there, or what surprised you about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think some of their most famous animals are wolves and foxes. They have quite a few of them. They also have a lot of moose. I have a moose magnet on my fridge now to remember Estonia when I miss it. And I interacted a lot with beavers. Beavers are everywhere, making their dams all the time. So in terms of outdoor activities and when I was able to interact with these animals, a lot of what I did in the winter was go like cross-country skiing or snowshoeing. snowshoeing is a really popular activity. And when we would snowshoe in the woods outside of Tartu, we would often encounter wolves at a distance or moose sometimes in the woods. Estonia actually has a ton of brown bears, and they're very proud of it because their next door neighbor, Latvia, has 0 brown bears because all of the Latvian brown bears escaped to Estonia. And so Estonians really like to rub that in the face of their neighbors, that they welcomed more brown bears than Latvia did. And then I think in terms of like other wildlife, we interacted a lot with fish. So one thing that I was really excited to do is go ice fishing on Lake Pepsi, which is the big lake in between Russia and Estonia. It's part of their border. And during the winter, a really big outdoor activity is to drive out onto this frozen lake and then drill a hole in the ice and go ice fishing and make yourself some fish stew. So I think those were probably some of my favorite outdoor activities. Estonians are immensely famous for their saunas. So their saunas look a little bit different from American style saunas in the sense that they're like a big wooden hut and it's a bunch of steam coming off of hot coals or hot wood. And that's a lot of what they do in the winter is sauna to stay warm. And then after you're done sauning and you're really, really hot, you jump in the frozen lake next door. And it just like makes your heart rush and your heart beats so fast. And that's like how they get their adrenaline up in the winter.
Oh, that sounds so cool. Did you get a chance to go ice fishing?
Yeah, I did go ice fishing.
Did you catch anything?
So much I couldn't feel my feet. I did. I caught a little fish. So a little Baltic perch, which is a type of fish that grew on me. And they also, in Estonia, they like to eat their fish raw sometimes. So they'll just, especially Baltic herrings, they'll just take a piece of bread and then they'll put a couple of raw herrings on top and some mayonnaise, and then that's their breakfast.
I want to ask you about Estonian language, and I'm not going to ask you to speak any, but I wonder if you are, when you arrived in Estonia, what was it like to communicate with people?
Yeah, definitely. So Estonians have a very unique language. It's called Estonian, and it's actually not related to a lot of its neighboring languages. So I think a lot of people think because Estonia is right next to Russia, that Estonian is like the Russian language. But Estonian is actually most close to 2 other languages, Finnish and Hungarian. And they think the language is actually part of like an ancient tribal movement across Europe. And so it's a very old language. And in general, most people in Estonia speak English. Estonia as a country is ranked 5th highest in terms of English comprehension of non-English speaking countries across the world. So like if you guys have been to or heard of Denmark or Sweden or Norway, those countries are ranked a little bit higher than Estonia, but in general, Estonians speak wonderful English. That being said, about 25% of the population in Estonia is ethnic Russian instead of ethnic Estonian. And they speak Russian as their primary language. And many of the Russian speakers don't speak English. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges of being in Estonia, was learning how to navigate speaking with Russian speakers. I did try to learn Estonian. I took Estonian classes, which was really fun. So if you want to say hello, for instance, you say tere, T-E-R-E. Or if you want to say like happy birthday, you'd say Palju one sünnipäevaks, which is a really long word, but it's a very unique language. It has like so many different features to it that are different from English. And I have here my Estonian textbook, and I'll just hold it up to the screen so you can see kind of how Estonian is written. And what the page I'll show you is the numbers 1 through 12, I think. I don't
Oh,
know
great.
how clear that is, but maybe you can get a sense of what Estonian language looks like.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah,
Wow.
so it's a very fun language.
Awesome. I am curious, just from a standpoint of somebody who has gone and spent a whole year living in a country, and you in particular are a standout Reach the World traveler because of the great attitude and just general positivity with which you approached all aspects of this experience. I can't recommend enough your articles and your exchange on the Reach the World website. Um, but I wonder if you were speaking directly to younger people, which you are. um, I wonder what you would advise people who are looking to, have a global adventure of their own. What would you suggest they could do now, and what could they sort of start doing as they start to get older?
Definitely. So I think you referenced earlier, Tim, one of the best skills you can learn to help travel, which is learning a new language. I think classes in general could be super helpful, even outside of language. I, in particular, found history classes to be the most helpful in informing how I acted in Estonia. Estonia has a very sensitive history. They were occupied by the Soviet Union and by Nazi Germany. And in order to be sensitive to the country's past, I had to have that history knowledge to be able to interact with people and make sure I didn't insult or offend them. So I think history classes are really great to learn about the role a country has had in the world. I always advise, if you live in a city or a county where they have multicultural resources or resource centers, going to visit them. I lived in Los Angeles for 2 years, and Los Angeles actually has an Estonian house where people from the Estonian diaspora that moved to the US will gather to celebrate Estonian holidays or to eat Estonian food. So if you have some sort of resource center like that, educational center, definitely go and visit and participate in their activities. Maybe connect with certain countries groups on Facebook if you can. I'm still part of a lot of Estonian groups on Facebook, and that's how I stay engaged with the country. And then I think the last thing I would recommend for people who want to, for young kids who would like to go abroad eventually, is learn or feel comfortable now pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and trying new things, especially in a country like Estonia, where people are so shy. They're very known for being very quiet. They don't approach strangers. You have to learn to approach people that you're not used to talking to and learn to navigate unfamiliar situations. And so even you can just start small with trying new things, like trying a new food you haven't tried before, or maybe reaching out to someone that you haven't spoken to before that you know comes from a different country and interviewing them or learning about their past. I think those are really good ways to start.
They're all such good ideas. And I would just add, you touched on it a little bit, that if you don't live in a city that has an Estonian house or a cultural resource like that, many of those organizations have online tools, especially now, where if you want to, listen to two people speaking Estonian to each other, you could probably find that somewhere on the internet. So cool. You touched a little bit on some traditions and holidays in Estonia.
Definitely.
And I wondered if you witnessed or participated in one in particular that you really enjoyed.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one that I most enjoyed participating in was very unique to Tartu, the city I lived in. And the city celebrates every October the anniversary of the University of Tartu becoming the national university. And that's a really special holiday for them because it represents the moment that the university was able to start teaching in Estonian. So for many decades, the country was required to speak Russian because they were under the power of the Soviet Union. And so it led to a lot of cultural and language suppression. And so as part of this holiday, everyone gathers in the streets, and it's usually started snowing by then. And everyone lights a torch, and you carry the torch and you walk through the streets of Tartu, and you sing Estonian songs for like 2 or 3 hours, marching in the snow. I actually have a photo of it. I'm not sure if I can share my screen, Tim.
Yeah,
Okay?
sure. Yeah, you definitely
Okay.
can.
So here's,
There you go.
can you guys see that?
Yeah.
So that's me with my torch standing in front of the main building of the University of Tartu. And you can see people gathered behind me. Estonia has fraternities and sororities. They're very different from American fraternities and sororities, but you can always tell someone is in a fraternity.
All right, Anna, I think maybe the screen sharing is a little bit too much for the internet connection. If I'll bring you out of screen share and we'll get you back.
Sorority because
All right, I think Anna's call just dropped temporarily. I'm sure she'll rejoin us in just a minute. Here she is.
okay.
Hey, welcome back.
Hi.
Yeah, I think the screen sharing was just a little bit too much, but that we all saw the picture. What a cool picture.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard, I started talking about 2 of my other favorite holidays. So, and I think that might have been cut out, but I'll just share them really quickly.
Great.
So my 2 other favorite holidays in Estonia are the Song Festival. So Estonia is very proud of their singing heritage. They actually have the most famous Estonian. I'm not sure if you guys would recognize him, but he's the composer of music who's been performed the most, like the total number in the whole world. So they have a lot of songs they're very proud of. And they gather every summer in this big auditorium. It's an outdoor amphitheater. And they gather to sing songs together for hours. And they have like food stalls and they play games. And it's really fun. It's like a summer festival. And then Christmas is my other favorite time of year in Estonia because they have 2 traditions that are just really fun to watch. So they're very famous for their Christmas markets. So the Christmas market in Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, was actually voted the best Christmas market in all of Europe last year. And they'll have a bunch of stalls that get together to sell goods, and there will be a stage where people perform, and there's usually a gigantic Christmas tree, like the size of the national Christmas tree in Washington, D.C. And yeah, you just drink hot chocolate and eat like little baked goods, and it's really cozy and wonderful. And Christmas time, their favorite thing to eat is blood sausage, which I think is a little bit gross, but it's a huge Estonian tradition. So I thought I'd mention that.
All right. Wow, a couple great traditions to explore for anyone who wants to dive a little bit deeper into Estonian culture. You can do that in a couple different ways. The way I'd recommend right away is jumping onto Anna's virtual exchange articles on the Reach the World website. My colleague Mara has posted a link to that in the live chat on the right. I really hope you check it out. And when we come back and connect with Anna again in a couple of weeks, we'll have a chance to ask her some more questions about her time in Estonia, and maybe some more questions you have about Estonian culture and some of the things that she talks about in her article. So unfortunately, we're running out of time, but real quick, Anna, I want to ask you a question I like to end our live streams on, and that is, as a world traveler yourself, once you are released from COVID-19 quarantine, what is one place that you'd like to go and explore?
Oh, that's a great question. I've been a huge fan of The Amazing Race lately, and I just went to Namibia in Africa, and I think that would be on my list because I've never been to Africa before, so I would love to go there.
All right, are you gonna apply to be on The Amazing Race, or are you just gonna go and check it out on your own speed?
Maybe we'll see if I can get on The Amazing Race. Maybe I'll see you guys there.
Well, Anna, this was so much fun talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank our entire YouTube live stream audience for joining us today. Please join us again. This is our last live stream event for this week after a really exciting week of events. It's a great way to end. And next week, we're going to be dealing with and talking about a lot of fascinating STEM topics. So I hope you'll join us. You can find a complete listing of upcoming live stream events, including next week's STEM events, at athome.reachtheworld.org. Anna, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.